Disruptors and curious minds, welcome to another episode of Thinking on Paper, where we unpack the future with the people building it. We push it, prod it, question it, and figure out if it's actually going to be what we as humans need. My name's Jeremy. This is Mark. Mark, do you have a little history lesson for us today?
I want to take you back. Harvard, 1968. A head-mounted display suspended from the ceiling. You put it on your head. 3D wireframe objects are overlaid onto your view. Your real-time perspective changes on how you move your head. This is Ivan Sutherland's Sword of Damocles, the first system where computer graphics were placed into a view of the real world. It's primitive, but it's the first, perhaps, AR, augmented reality, but it's not called augmented reality, Jeremy. The term AR isn't coined until 1992. Two Boeing engineers, Tom Cordell and David Mizell, coined the term when they're building a system to help workers assemble complex wiring harnesses. Essentially, Boeing employees experiment again with a head-mounted display showing instructions over physical aircraft parts. AR then goes into hibernation for a few years. People are tinkering, playing around, and it re-emerges as a mobile concept in 1997. So enter this time Ronald Azuma, and in his paper, A Survey of Augmented Reality, he defines AR in this format we still use today. Three things: it combines real and virtual, it's interactive in real time, and it's registered in 3D. So around the same time as Ronald Azuma was doing that, early outdoor AR prototypes emerge. One is Steve Finer's Mars, and that's got nothing to do with Elon Musk and going to Mars and terraforming that planet. It stands for Mobile Augmented Reality System, and it's at Columbia University, and essentially it's like a Ghostbusters pack. You put on your back another head-mounted display, GPS-based outdoor AR. You use it, or they used it to do tours of the campus. Okay, so that's the beginning of location-based AR. And the hunt for the mass market begins. In 2009, we get Layar, Layar, the first consumer AR browser on a smartphone. And this was used for Splinter Cell, for a Splinter Cell conviction, so a Splinter Cell game launch. Players used the AR to do missions on their phone around Amsterdam, complete tasks in augmented reality. Pretty cool. From Splinter Cell and Layar. 2012, IKEA show you what flat pack furniture could look like, but they don't put it together for you. They show you what it looks like in AR. 2013, Google launch their Google glasses to widespread. What's the opposite of fanfare? Widespread. And then 2016, yes, it really is that long ago. 2016, perhaps the high watermark for augmented reality, Pokémon Go.
That was a big one. Yeah.
That was a big one. And that brings us to our guest. In that very long intro into the history of augmented reality, our guest is working in augmented reality. It is Michael Guerin. He is the founder and CEO of Imivisar, and he joins us today to say where the journey has gone after Pokémon Go. Thank you for thinking on paper with us, Michael. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark, and thanks for that very comprehensive introduction.
Did I miss anything out of the story and history of AR there?
I think all the main bits are there. Plenty has happened since 2016 now, so maybe I can add some of that today.
Okay. What has changed since Pokémon Go?
Yes, so three that I would give an example of whenever I ask people. So I give different talks from time to time, and I ask people, have you ever used augmented reality? And most people say no. And then I show them Pokémon Go, as you've touched on. I also show them the IKEA app, which a lot of people have used, which you touched on as well. But the other, probably the much, much bigger one, is if anybody has used a lens or a filter on Instagram or Snapchat, that's all augmented reality. Probably the interesting thing, it's been incredibly successful. I'm actually just back from an event in Brussels. I was with the Snap team. There's 8 billion uses of augmented reality on Snapchat every single day. for context, there's 14 billion searches, the Google searches per day, 8 billion uses of augmented reality on Snapchat, right? So nobody in the general public would associate Snapchat with augmented reality, but they're actually the biggest users of it and the biggest company delivering it. So like since 2016, I mean, there's a whole lot we can get into now in terms of like spatial experiences and immersive experiences, but in terms of day-to-day use, there is literally billions of uses of it every day on Snapchat alone. That's not including filters on Instagram or any meta platform. It's definitely it's used much more prominently than people think it is. But probably most interestingly, everywhere where it's been really successful, it's almost never called augmented reality.
I know Jeremy is a big snapper. I don't use Snapchat. Can you use Snapchat without using the augmented reality, the lens features? Does it work as a standalone app without that?
Yeah, messaging, it's location based, like where are your buddies? You can flip open this dashboard and you can see that Mark is snowboarding and Michael and I are at work. You could see all of that. You could see all of that stuff. It's, Michael, really interesting that that's a very relatable reference to what augmented reality is. And there's a piece of the world that's actually there, and there's a layer over the top of the world that's changing that through a digital experience. So I think it's a really cool way to say, hey guys, this stuff's been around and you guys are using it every single day, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, there's other ones people have seen, like the wine bottles thing was quite popular a few years ago, where Snoop Dogg jumped out.
19 Crimes.
Yeah. So it's been, and then it was used in marketing a little bit more. There's kind of the back of the cereal box style experience. There's a lot of kids experiences. And then like Gorillaz, the band, which you are probably aware of, they launched an album 3 years ago now, maybe, where they took over Times Square in New York and Piccadilly in London, and it was a location-based experience. It was like a listening party for the new album, but it wasn't just listening. Whenever all the fans went there and they held up their phone, the Gorillaz characters were like sitting on top of the buildings, and they were able to like virtually take over all the billboards and like own the place and make it a whole Gorillaz experience, So there's like, I think the evolution that's kind of happening now, like lots happened with augmented reality, and there was always the wow factor initially, but then making it sticky has been a challenge, and then getting things beyond gimmick. So like, the Snoop Dogg out of a wine bottle thing was like kind of cool at the start, and then once you've seen it, and are you really going to keep, if you're another wine company or whatever else, you got to keep investing in that type of thing. So I think what we're trying to get to is slightly like what we focus on, is slightly longer form content. So rather than like a 10 to 20 second experience where the focus is on you taking a video and sharing it with your friends, our focus is like 60 to 90 seconds, slightly longer form, where you're more engaged in the location and the content. And we've been doing that now for 4 or 5 years. And then what's definitely happening at a much quicker rate than we expected. Glasses are coming.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop you there. We'll get to glasses.
Yeah.
You said a word, gimmicky, when you described anything to do with Snoop Dogg jumping out of a wine bottle. Like, I think that's a good adjective to use for that. Why does the world need more augmented reality?
I'm going to phrase it slightly differently. I'm not sure the world needs more augmented reality, but if I give you some context to why we're using it, I believe we're using it in a meaningful way. So for a bit of context, us as a company, we have over 150 experiences in 12 countries, right? So we started building experiences in tourist attractions, and now we do a lot of stuff in large tech companies. So we, as an example, build most of the AR or all the AR experiences for Salesforce. If you give you an example of one of their experiences, if you join them in some of their offices around the world, on your first day, you used to sit through a couple of hours of onboarding. There'd be some presentations, and they tell you about the culture and the values and whatever else. Instead of doing that, they put up a QR code, you scan it with your phone, and then you go and explore the building with everybody else that's joined that day, and you learn about Salesforce through this shared experience, right?
Everyone at Salesforce who joins does that?
Everybody in Europe, East Coast and West Coast of America. Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
It is, yeah. So that's all just come... the last year or so. So like the reason, there's lots of different reasons behind it and why they want to do it, but ultimately, I'll give you another example in a second, but people typically outside of work, people are communicating on a very like visual and short form way, right? So people use TikTok, Snapchat, WhatsApp. It's real short and snappy, and a lot of it is visual and some of it is interactive content. And then you come into the place of work and it's like, 2 hour long presentations with 127 slides of all this text. And you expect people who like deal this way outside of work, you're just not going to get the same engagement if that's the way you're communicating with people. So to back to your question, why does the world need augmented reality? I think it's more like, can we use different forms of communication to capture people where they are and still engage them with the message? So, whether we like it or not, like our brains are becoming increasingly tuned towards this really short form content and all the dopamine hits that come alongside it. If you're an employer or a tourist attraction or a brand or whatever it might be, if you want to engage with people, you've got to move the direction and the way people are communicating. And I think augmented reality, if done right, can be a really effective way of communicating a message that still has meaning, and that people will still register the message that you're trying to communicate with them.
So I don't know if you guys or know of like Walgreens. Have you heard of Walgreens? It's like a drugstore, like a CVS, Walgreens, the drugs and like all that stuff. I worked at one when I was 15, and my onboarding, I distinctly remember this. This was like this little bullshit CRT TV VCR combo, and I was like tucked into this. It was a break room, but it was literally like a 5x5 closet, and I'm literally watching like VHS tapes on corporate culture at Walgreens. I was like, what is happening?
And then before that, it was like a 200-page manual, which you had to read, right? So like it went from like a really boring book. I'm sure at a point in time, those VHSs were incredibly innovative. And I'm sure whenever they transitioned to doing things on PowerPoint, they probably thought that was even better. And then whenever they started having video in it, I'm sure in the PowerPoints, they thought it was even better. Like it's just another evolution. It's a new form. It's a new medium of communication, but it is shorter form. Maybe, is that being driven by that, or is that being driven by other media sources? Probably a bit more. But I'm not massively concerned in the sense that this transition has happened over time. Whenever radio came in, people had concerns, and even electricity and video and the internet and whatever else. It's just another form of communication, and arguably a pretty exciting one.
Well, Michael, Mark and I are children of the 80s and early 90s, and MTV was supposed to have melted our brains. So the fact that we're still alive and functioning, I guess, is probably okay.
I don't know, but if you get the thinking, paper has a lot of short form content these days, Jeremy, because people like digest.
You got to serve it up the way, yeah.
Well, you've got a good word for it, nuggets. We've got a lot of nuggets down there in their short form. How did the Salesforce partnership come about? Did they come to you or did you go to them?
Yeah, it was actually inbound. They're a very innovative company, in fairness. Like lots of tech companies tried to be, but they were striving for better ways to engage people digitally within their building, whether you're a visitor or a new member of staff. So they were looking for digital storytelling, whether that was in video format or like QR codes as you went around the building, whatever else.
Can I ask you to define digital storytelling for our listeners? Yeah.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, like we actually use the term spatial storytelling, which is either better or worse, depending on.
I think that's I prefer that.
Yeah.
Right?
So
digital and augmented are very like kind of quasi icky terms a little bit. Yeah.
I tell you what's worse, the word immersive. And I said this on a panel in South by Southwest last year. Immersive, in the world of immersive technology, it's used everywhere, but then you look outside and it's literally used everywhere as well. Like I saw a university advertising last year and they were the most immersive university. And then I saw somebody else describing a film and it was really immersive. And then I think it was like a painting and decorating company were describing what they do as immersive. And I was like, this word means everything and nothing, So digital storytelling is obviously very broad. Like it's really anything that mixes any kind of digital media and storytelling, and that can be video format. That could even be an audio guide. That's all digital storytelling. The reason we use spatial storytelling is because it uses a physical space and the story is overlaid on top of that. So what we mean by that is physical location, and there is a story. There's normally visuals and audio as part of it. So when you hold up your phone, you might see or wear glasses, you might see things around you. You'll also hear the story, but it uses the physical space that you're in.
So let's stay on the definitions for a second here. So spatial reality is one I hear, spatial compute, spatial this, spatial that. Um, isn't reality already kind of spatial? Like we're there's a technological overlay that I understand needs to be communicated, right? And all we're doing really is kind of mimicking what normally happens in nature, but doing it with technology in a way that hits the same beats of the story that we resonate with. The Joseph Campbell hero's journey thing is just applied differently.
The terminology and language thing is a problem across the board. So like we've talked about, like there's augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality, and they're all kind of under the extended reality bracket. But then you also have the concept of a metaverse, and then you have spatial computing and spatial experiences. And then with Snapchat and Instagram, you have lenses and filters, and it's ultimately like all a different flavor of the same thing. Probably the bigger challenge is it's different companies taking different terms. So like Apple only accept things for their Apple Vision Pro if it's called spatial computing or spatial experience. They won't accept a description that mentions augmented or virtual reality. Microsoft were definitely pushing the mixed reality terminology for quite a while, and then obviously Meta went down the metaverse route, and like uh, they're variations on the same thing, and they mean different things. But what we do, some people would call augmented reality, and a lot of people would call mixed reality. And I think the way that it's kind of gone in the last 6 or 12 months is augmented is becoming more of the mobile version, and then mixed is more of the head worn version. But it's really like the world is there, and there's something overlaid on top.
Jeremy, I've got a question for you. What do you see, Jeremy? This is to you, Jeremy, before I go back to Michael. Is a good use case of augmented reality, seeing as you're a little bit, you got your 90s head on today?
Geez, like short answer, I don't know. Like,
I'll tell you mine.
Yeah.
If you want, because
Please.
during the summer, my kids, Michael, are 9 and 6. We went to a lot of tourist attractions across England and across France. The augmented reality that I saw wasn't particularly good for me. I mean, the kids loved it because it's like, oh, it's augmented reality. I didn't think it was. But I think that in tourism, in these big, old, historical tourist attractions especially, there's an opportunity to use augmented reality to learn and to experience what life might have been like in a way that they don't take advantage of.
So that's literally where it all started for us. That was my vision at the start, Mark, that there are so many places all around the world and so many incredible things happened. And some, like, if you go to a tourist attraction and you get a really good tour guide, they can really describe things in a way that you can almost picture it yourself. But the chance that, the number of times you get that really good one and that you're really engaged and you can keep the kids engaged while you're engaged.
That's a very interesting point, because a really good tour guide would be better than any AR.
Yeah, I'll debate that one maybe, but I think if you get good AR, so the other thing you said with was that the AR isn't good, right? So it's literally where we started. So as an example, we have an experience in a place called Spike Island, which is Ireland's version of Alcatraz. Basically, it's actually 8 times the size of Alcatraz. It was a prison and a military fort for a couple of 100 years, right the way up to 2004. Really fascinating place. So we have 15 points of interest around the prison. So as an example, in the first stop, it's called the guards room, and you enter, and the fireplace and the guard's chair is there. But when you hold up your phone, the prison guard is warming his hands against the fire, and then he turns around and he starts shaking his baton at you as if you're about to be brought into the prison, and he explains to you that you're about to be brought in. And then the second stop on the tour is in the punishment cell. And when you're in the punishment cell, these cells, even now when it's a tourist attraction, are really grim conditions, right? It's really damp in there, it's cold. This is off the coast of Ireland. Like, you're there in November, it's not a pretty place to be. And you hold up your phone, and then the prisoner is there chained to the wall, blindfolded, and he doesn't know what time of day it is, and he's only let off the handcuffs for 30 minutes per day, right? The rest of the time he's blindfolded and chained to the wall. So the first day we launched this, I was there and I gave an iPad to two ladies who were walking past, and they saw the guy in the punishment cell, and then immediately after they started crying. And I was like, is this a good thing or not? But both of them said that they had walked around the prison for like 2 hours and they hadn't really considered the human toll or the human impact of the place. So if you had a really good tour guide, could you get to that? You possibly could, but having a visual of what really happened there, just on a device that you can just hold in front of you, is like, it's so incredibly powerful if it's done right. And there's so many subtleties to what done right means. Like the shadows need to be right, and the chains that we have actually went right to where the hooks are in the wall, where the chains actually went to. So if you can get all of that right, although you know it's not real, the two terms that we use internally a lot is plausible and believable. And if it's plausible that happened and believable in this scenario, you can really, really connect to the story and to the place. And when that's done right, it's incredible, you know?
I think, Mark, I'm going to...
Jeremy?
No, he actually, in talking through that, kind of fired some neurons. So I think this technology definitely has a empathy activation potential if it's done the right way. And I think that's what you're talking about, Michael. And there's a couple of examples that I'll share that in Atlanta has the Center for Civil and Human Rights, and amazing museum to basically tell some of the hardest stories that need to be told in the world. And there's a lunch counter installation that basically mimics if you were African American person back in the 50s or 60s at a lunch counter, you would basically hear people walking behind you. You got headphones on. You would hear people walking behind you, screaming racial slurs, like scaring you, all of that. Like you would actually feel that. And I think if you read about that in a book, you're like, damn, that sucks. But if you like really feel it, and there's one more example that I'll share. I don't know if you've ever run across a woman named Melitza Zek. She has an installation. I worked with her a little bit a few years ago, and she has an installation, or I guess it's a program or an experience called something about the tree. And it actually shows what it feels like to be a tree growing, and then what it feels like to be a tree chopped down. And she highlighted the same experiences that people had when the tree got chopped down. People were like bawling their eyes out. And I think if it's done right, I think it's a way to get humans to be more empathetic, I think.
And passionate about a subject, and knowledgeable about a subject as well, if done right.
Yeah, and look, done right is so important. And ultimately that then comes down to the technology. Like whenever I started the company, there was a couple of key things that I wanted us to get right. And the mantra generally at the start was, if we can nail the technology, the end user won't notice it. Because I think in most other augmented reality experiences, people get told that they have to find a tabletop or a ground, and then they've got to detect the surface, then they got to tap to make the thing appear, then they got to pinch it to make it bigger and smaller. So you're like 5 steps in, you've just like had to do all these things, and now you're entirely focused on the technology and not the story. So for ours, you walk into that room, you hold up your phone, the thing appears, and you hit play. You shouldn't really even, it should feel so natural that you don't even notice the technology.
What are some other important things to do it right?
To think about it completely differently to every other story. So we have this guide to spatial storytelling, which we've kind of created internally. So whenever you're telling, even if you're doing an audio tour of a place, you'll pick this place, you'll do the 10 stops, you'll do the research, and then you'll write a story. You might have a first person narrative, you might have a narrator. That's probably how it'll evolve. When you're doing a spatial story or an augmented reality experience, the narrative is the last thing that you should think about. So the most important thing is to do a site survey of the room, the building, whatever it might be. So really understand the space. And then the second thing is the user movement. So if you want, so like in the 2 that I've just given you an example of, with the guy at the fireplace, the prison guard at the fireplace warming his hands, and then the next one, like you can see the prisoner change the wall and you can walk around them, right? So if you think about the place, the user movement, then you want to think about the visuals, then the interactivity, and the last thing is the narrative. Then you make the narrative suit all the things. And the reason we do that, for context, is augmented reality, if you stand in one place and hold up your phone, it's basically just a less enjoyable video, because you might as well just watch it on a video. Whereas if you move, it's the only thing that makes it different to any other medium. So a really, really important thing when you're designing any experience is to not think about, like, you'll know roughly the story that you want to tell, but don't write a script. look at the location, look at the user movement, think what visuals you want in there, think about the timing of the visuals and possibly any interactivity, and then you can write the script at the end.
Counterintuitive to what I first thought when Jeremy asked that question. I thought you'd lead with the story, but it makes perfect sense to lead with the space.
Yep.
Well, there's triggers in the space, I think, that can generate different aspects of the story. This kind of choose your own adventure. I spent a lot of years doing sound design for TV, video games, digital experiences, augmented experiences. And there's this trigger of like, hey, what can that sound drive the user to do? And really think about, do you ever think about like emotional response when you're designing these beats of the story?
No, that's literally the basis to it all, to be honest with you. And so whenever we're writing, so like we have a spatial script, which has all the different elements of what I've just discussed. And a really important thing for every single bit of the story and every scene is what we expect the emotional response to be. You know, if you can create an emotional connection to a piece of content, then the people will remember that. So whether that's like you enjoyed it, you were frustrated, you were angry, you were crying, laughing, whatever it might be, as long as there's an emotional response to the content you're engaging with, you're much more likely to remember it. So the next time you go home and tell people about the tourist attraction you went to in Ireland, or to the best onboarding you've ever had in a company, you'll probably remember the ones that you had more fun with, that you cried on. And that's what we're trying to, in an appropriate and sensitive way, I would say as well. It's not just let's get everybody to cry at every stop, you know, it's got to be appropriate to the content.
I still remember going to the Holocaust Museum in Berlin, and it was incredible. And the Spike Island would be, again, very easy to tell a story that makes people feel very emotive. And for your examples too, Jeremy. My first writing website was actually called The Metaverse Writer, Michael, which dates me. And unfortunately, Mark Zuckerberg destroyed my business when he rebranded Facebook as Meta and the Metaverse. I want to read a quote which I think links to what you're doing and a future where AR and AI combine, and maybe you can paint that for us. This is from Mark Zuckerberg, July this year, quote, "I continue to think that glasses are basically going to be the ideal form factor for AI, because you can let an AI see what you see throughout the day, hear what you hear, and talk to you." End quote. Now, as mad as a hatter that Mark Zuckerberg is, when you hear that, first of all, what do you think about his opinion?
I think it's the next natural enough evolution of hardware devices. I do think they're like, so, I mean, you referred to the Google glasses in your intro, Mark. What happened between then and about a year ago was everybody was striving for one thing that you wore in your head that did everything. And what's happened in the last 12 months is people have realized that that's not the case. So literally only yesterday or the day before at United XR, which is the biggest AR and VR conference in Europe, one of the directors of engineering for Snapchat was on, and he had a slide which talked about headsets for experiences, the everyday use AI glasses, and then where Snap representing themselves as the in-between. So it's glasses that you might wear multiple times throughout the day, but it's to do something and to take back off. So a bit like, you know, you use a laptop or a phone, you use it at a point in time and then you take it back off. You don't have your phone out in front of you all the time, but you use it for things throughout the day. And they're kind of positioning themselves as a device that you'll use for things and then put them down again. Whether you'll carry all these glasses around, entirely up to you, you know. But I think the AI glasses, in fairness, you know, what he's saying there and what I've seen with the Meta Ray-Ban AI glasses, like, people really love them. You know, they sold out in like 6 weeks when they launched the display ones earlier this year. I think there's been like 27 pairs of glasses released this year from different companies. And there's about the same to be launched in the first half of next year. So like it's funny, like the glasses Google launched, which was 11 years ago, I believe. The head of Google XR got up at Augmented World Expo in Long Beach in June earlier this year and said, he showed the video from 11 years ago and he said, so everything that we talked about back then, we can now actually do, right? So it's taken that long to get to where that marketing video went. So I think that form of glasses can happen now, where you have like a bit of something you can talk to, you can listen to music, it can capture a photo, and it's like a heads up display. It's not spatial, there's nothing in the world in front of you, but there's like information displayed in front of you. And I think that will that's a form factor that people will get used to. And then in the next couple of years, you will get more spatial content in the world around you. So I think it's somewhat inevitable. I just don't think it's going to be one pair of glasses or one pair of hardware that does it all.
It was a smart move to jump on the Wayfarers. I mean, that's such an iconic
Yeah.
pair of shades that it's like, wow. But Mark, I'm gonna share my thoughts, even though you didn't ask me about it. So Michael, we've been engaging with some really interesting guests, Carissa Velez, specifically most recently talking about privacy and effects of data sovereignty on the individual, on democracies, on all of that stuff. I start thinking about, okay, these glasses are great and they're cool and they're going to allow us to do really cool things, but we're basically deploying like surveyors that see the world in a specific lens and can really grab more. I'm not trying to say what you're doing is bad, is going to destroy humanity. I think there's some very awesome benefit. No, let me be clear though. There's some really cool benefit to what you're doing in these experiences, especially the Salesforce stuff, especially the museums, like having these great ways to trigger empathy. But like on the glasses side, it can, my head goes to scary mode a little bit. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, look, which I think is fair enough, but unfortunately, that's really not new either, Jeremy. Like the little device we have in our pockets has been recording us for, or well, it was seemingly not, but it's been listening for, at least a decade, if not longer. The difference is it was always audio data, and now it's visual, and then that's more of a challenge, and then look, I think what it then comes down to, like, Europe and America are taking very different approaches in this. We love some regulation and public policy in Europe to try and clamp down on things. But ultimately, I think consumers will decide. And you've seen that with different technology companies over the last 10 years. Some trust more than others, and who's right and who's wrong. But I think they're all, like, Meta have their thing with the Ray-Ban parent company and the Oakley parent company, but Google have just launched theirs with a competing glasses company, and Snap will have theirs. And I think it'll probably come down to which companies do people trust to be wearing on their heads, seeing everything that they're seeing.
Mark, I'm going to design an AI model that basically runs through terms and conditions of technology, apps, and devices, and gives me the shortcut version of, hey, is this going to be cool for me? Is this going to be scary for me? That's my next project.
I think it's also super important for us to be very educated on where it's going as best we can. And I think that's, where regulations can be good, where they can force people to force companies to make it clear where data is going. But I mean, you've seen with lots of big companies over the last 5 years, you have to put something in where you have to accept terms and conditions, or you can't see your friends anymore on that network. And then people just tick the box, hit confirm, and then keep going, but I do think it's really important for people to be as informed as possible. And then, hopefully as a society, we choose the right direction.
I think Ivan Sutherland is still alive. And I think it's not ironic that his first project was called the Sword of Damocles. But quick thought experiment for you, Michael. So the King of England calls you tomorrow and he says, look, Buckingham Palace, numbers are down. The estates, feedback is they're bored. How quickly could you go into the royal estate, change things up, and what would you do?
I think as an Irishman, he's probably not likely to ring me. But, but if he did, I would, look, we can get things up and running in 3 months, maybe up to 6, depending on how expansive the experience is and on what side of the story they want to tell. So, yeah.
Bad example.
Well, no, and that could be really interesting. So then you could insert your own Easter egg nuggets with the real story, right? No, that's okay. Wow, we're getting off track, but cool things to think about.
Yes. Closing question, Jeremy, as I hang my head in embarrassment from not researching my thought experiments properly.
Yeah. So lastly, Michael, thanks so much for jumping in with us, and would definitely love to stay in the loop on what you're doing. Feel free to keep us up to speed and share what you're doing. Maybe we can do a round 2 at some point. But one question we like to leave our guests with is one from Kevin Kelly. What do we want humans to be, and how can technology help us get there if it can?
I've got flavors of this from the things that I've said, but ultimately we're doing this so that people can feel more connected to the places that you're in. So whether that's the Spike Island example, or whether you've just joined a company or whatever it might be, there are so many stories and places around the world, and we want people to be connected to. You could stand in, the middle of London or any city in the world, and something happened here in 1502 and 1657 and 1727, all these different years, so many different things have happened. So we as a company definitely want people to be more connected, and then connected to each other. And look, that we've actually just launched a Canva for augmented reality where people can build their own experiences. It's called Lurio, and we're ultimately trying to make it possible for anybody without any design, animation, storytelling knowledge, any previous knowledge, that they can build these experiences and share them with their family, friends, whoever it might be. So yeah, look, people to feel more connected to the world around them is our goal.
I like that. We speak often about connection to people. We don't often speak about connection to place, Jeremy. We should add that as a node in the Thinking on Paper Substack and label it for future exploration.
I love it.
Nice.
I love it. Michael, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me today, guys. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Be curious, stay disruptive.
Keep thinking on paper. Wow, that was an emotional episode of Thinking on Paper. If you're still with us, and of course you are after that, if you have any questions about that show, email us at hello@thinkingonpaper.xyz, subscribe on the platform you're listening, and please, as a curious mind, share this with just one person in your life who would like to hear these conversations.
Maybe two. Share it with two.
Maybe two. Share it with two.